A tie-in concession is you say, all right, he or she is going to ask for this, he or she is going to ask for that. What concessions am I willing to give in order to satisfy them? Make a list. These are my tie-in concessions. Give tie-in concessions very grudgingly. I mean, you don't just throw them all out. When you are negotiating for something that you have to have and they're inflexible, then you can say, look, I'll throw in this if you give me that. Or I'll relent on this point if you'll relent on this point. But think through what you're willing to give up before you go in. Remember, 80% is preparation. This brings us to number 11. It's a very simple principle, and I recommend that you do it. It's called situation reversal. Put yourself in the position of the person you're negotiating with and think through and argue the negotiation from their point of view. Try to see it through their eyes. Assume that the other person is reasonable, that they want to achieve a beneficial transaction for themselves. Write down, if you were in their position, what would be all the things that they would want to get in this negotiation. This is what lawyers do, by the way. They argue the case from the other lawyer's point of view before they prepare their own case. So you argue the negotiation from the other person's point of view before you prepare your own case, and it gives you tremendous clarity in seeing where you have areas of agreement, where you have areas of disagreement, and where you can find areas of compromise very rapidly. 12, assumptions are one of the major reasons for disagreement. Assumptions and incorrect assumptions equal disagreements. And surprisingly enough, much of the time that is spent in negotiations is spent in resolving incorrect assumptions. First of all, ask, what are your assumptions? Not only your obvious assumptions, but your hidden assumptions. And B, what are their obvious and hidden assumptions? What are they assuming when they come in? Are they assuming that you really want to enter into this agreement? Are they assuming that you're indifferent to it? Are they assuming that you're friendly or hostile? Are they assuming that you're a good person or a hard person, and so on? Then question C is, could your assumptions be wrong? This is important. Could your assumptions be wrong based on what you think their assumptions are? If they were, how would you have to change your situation if your assumptions were wrong? See, one of the assumptions that we have when we are entering into a negotiation with someone else is that they actually want to conclude a deal. Sometimes people don't want to conclude a deal with you. What they want to do is they want to negotiate with you to force somebody else. So be very alert to that. And ask yourself, how can you clarify assumptions? Now, there's a simple way to clarify assumptions. And this is how I suggest that you start off every negotiation. It's what is called the interview style. Instead of launching right into business, go into an interview style as though you were a journalist. And here's a question that I ask over and over again to start an interview, to start a negotiation. Tell me, if you would, how would you ideally like to see this discussion resolved? What would be your ideal outcome to this negotiation? If you can tell me exactly what it is that you want to accomplish, then I can tell you exactly what it is that I want to accomplish, and we can start off clearly with regard to our assumptions, our positions, and our interests. And then finally, feedback in your own words. All right, now as I understand it, what you're saying is this. Feedback in your own words. As I understand it, what you want to accomplish is this. Is that correct? And in order of priority, this is what you want to accomplish, and so on. Is that correct? And finally, get agreement on your basic boundary conditions. Once you can agree on your basic boundary conditions, you can move right along into agreement on some of the critical issues in the negotiation. Now, here's number 13, what we call the Law of Four. The Law of Four is a tremendous mental tool. It works almost all the time, and it says there are four main issues to be resolved in any negotiation. There may be many smaller issues, but there are four main issues. Your job is to think through and identify what those issues are. Number one will be the big one, which will probably be finalized in the last 20% of the conversation. And then you'll have number 2, 3, and 4, which have an impact and affect number one. Now, let me give you an example. I bought a car recently, and we had to negotiate the purchase of the car. There were 4 ingredients in the negotiation. The price was the major ingredient, and then the style and color, delivery date, and then the accessories. Those 4 issues are resolved every time you buy a car. We finalized numbers 2, 3, and 4. What we wanted in the car, what it would look like, what the accessories would be, when we would take delivery of it. Then we came back to the price and were able to resolve the price. And the whole negotiation flowed. And I'll tell you how we did this a little bit later. This is a very, very powerful technique that you can use. But think through what are the 4 issues in any negotiation, and you'll be surprised. Like if you buy a house, what are the issues? Price, occupation, when you take possession of the house, the mortgage financing and the terms, and what is included in the purchase and what is not included in the purchase. So over and over again, you will find that the law of 4 is pretty consistent. It may be 5, it may be 3. Okay, what are the marks of a successful negotiator? If you want to be a successful negotiator, if you look at successful negotiators, here are some of their characteristics. First is that the negotiator views negotiating as a life process, that all of life is a process of compromising and adjusting conflicting interests. That it goes on every single day from the time you get up in the morning to who's going to make the breakfast, put on the coffee, plug in the kettle, take the kids to school, and so on. It's a continuous life process, but it's a win-win life process if you want to have a happy life. The good negotiator is open-minded. The good negotiator does not have a fixed mind or does not develop rigid positions. The poor negotiator gets one idea in mind, and that's the idea that they fight for, and they have very unhappy lives and very unhappy relationships. Good negotiator is flexible, willing to change, willing to drop a position if new information suggests that it would be a good idea. The good negotiator is cooperative. They don't look upon negotiating as a fight or as an adversarial relationship. They also are creative rather than competitive. Rather than trying to win, they are trying to find a solution that both people will be happy with. And finally, and this is most important, they're non-manipulative. When we talk about negotiating, one of the things that I find that people want to learn is tricks, tactics, ways to deke out the other person, ways to get the advantage, if you like. And I will tell you this, in all my years of negotiating, I have never found that good people, superior people, or good deals or superior deals are entered into as the result of any kind of tricks. I've seen lots of books and courses that tell you how to do role reversals and good guy, bad guy, and manipulative techniques where you try to trick or deke the person psychologically into making commitments or making decisions. This is all BS. It does not work in the real world. In the real world, it is honest, straightforward, direct, sincere men and women with a clear idea of what they want to accomplish and a commitment to entering into an agreement that everybody can live with who are the most successful in negotiating. You do not have to be cunning and difficult in order to be successful as a negotiator. Okay, here are some suggestive elements in negotiating which you should be aware of, because suggestive elements can affect as much as 95% of your thinking. 95% of your feelings, your emotions, your attitudes, your opinions, how you respond in a negotiation can be determined by these if you're not alert to them. And you know what they are. A starting point is location. Location has a powerful effect. Now, if you're going to negotiate something important, the key is to negotiate either on your own turf or on neutral turf. Your own or neutral. Because when you go to somebody else's office, somebody else's company, and you negotiate on their turf, you are at a distinct psychological disadvantage because you are outside your comfort zone. Even if you just take the person out for coffee or for lunch, it's better than negotiating something serious in their office, in their boardroom. All right, number 2, or the second, is personality. Personality is a powerful suggestive element. Now, what is the best personality in a negotiation? The best personality is an empathetic personality. Empathy, by the way, has been identified as the number 1 psychological or personality quality of all top salespeople. All people who are the very best at helping people enter into business transactions have very high degrees of empathy. They are liked and respected, and people feel good about them. So the more empathetic you are about the position of the other person, helping the other person get what they want, the more likely it is the person will enter into a successful negotiation with you. And the third is positioning. Positioning or body language. Positioning and body language. Very, very important. You can learn a lot from body language and a lot from positioning. The basic rule with regard to positioning is don't sit across the table from a person that you're negotiating with. Sit corner to corner, or better sit at a round table, or even better sit at chairs that don't have anything in between, just a coffee table. Position yourself so that you are in a cooperative position, not in an adversarial position. And with regard to body language, keeping your hands open and on top of your legs, or keeping your arms open and not folded, is a powerful way of suggesting sincerity, honesty, and frankness. When you close your eyes or lean back, what you're suggesting is that I'm closing you out, I am not agreeing with what you're doing, I am entering into a combative or adversarial position with you. So be very aware of positioning and body language. And finally, timing. Timing is important. We talked about that before. There's 2 types of timing. There's hurried versus relaxed. And you'll find that both of them have their place in negotiating. But if somebody's in a tremendous hurry to make a deal or to come to a conclusion and you're relaxed, it gives you a psychological advantage. Again, and you are just as relaxed as the options that you have developed. Comfort is another key. The more comfortable you are, that means air conditioning, lighting, rest, not fatigue, good furniture. If you're tired, you'll find that you'll make bad deals. That's why most organizations do not allow their executives to enter into business transactions except for 24 hours after flying across country because of jet lag. You find that because of jet lag, you don't think well. You don't think clearly because your mind and your body are on a different calendar, on a different clock. The more comfortable you can make the people you're negotiating with, the more that they will like you, the more likely you will enter into a good deal. And attitude is very important. A positive attitude, a cheerful attitude, is much more effective in a negotiation than a negative attitude. And the most important part of attitude is patience. Again, the very best negotiators are very patient negotiators. They take their time. They go slowly. They're not in a hurry. They don't rush. They take time to understand the other person. They remain unemotional except that they are warm, they're supportive, and they try to keep focusing the conversation on understanding and reaching an agreement that is satisfactory and helps the other person. In negotiating, by the way, there's what is called the law of indirect effort. It says the harder you try to achieve your own interests, the less successful you will be. But the harder you work to achieve an agreement that will be satisfactory to the other person, the harder the other person will tend to work to achieve an agreement that is satisfactory to you. The key is that both of you need to know what the other person has to get out of this agreement. All right, this brings us to number 16, which is a method of persuasion. How do you persuade people over to your point of view in the course of a negotiation? And first of all, it's called persuasion by reciprocation. The research seems to show that one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful of all persuasive influences on another person is reciprocity. It is what you do for the other person. It is tit for tat. It is doing favors for the other person that cause the other person to want to do favors or to give things to you. So here are some keys to using this persuasive method of reciprocity. The first is called the Socratic method. I learned this many years ago, and I thought, why, this is so powerful. You start off the negotiation or the discussion, especially if there are a whole list of things to discuss, and you go through every single item that you agree on. You agree, first of all, on everything that you agree on. And you will find that no matter how far apart you are, there are a tremendous number of issues upon which you agree or have thoughts in common. Once you've agreed to all of these, it's like yes. It's like having the person say yes, 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 yes. We agree on this, we agree on that, agree on all the minor issues. Before you get to more difficult issues, both people's minds are now open, flexible, friendly, warm, adaptive, and much more likely to come to an acceptable conclusion. Here's a little sentence that I would like you to memorize for the rest of your negotiating life, especially when you're negotiating agreements. It's, let's come back to that. Let's come back to that. Whenever you're negotiating, especially in the first 80% of the time allocated, and you run into a sticking point where one or the other is sticking on this point, say, let's come back to that. Let's go on to the other things. We'll come back to that later. And just go right past it, because the longer you hang on a point where one person or the other feels very intense, the more likely it is you will poison the negotiating climate and make agreement on the other issues, which may be minor, even more difficult. So let's come back to it. Just pass it over and get through everything that you possibly can that you can agree on. Agree slowly. I mean, don't just agree. Agree slowly and aim for fairness. Fairness is one of the most important single things that you can bring to an agreement. There is nothing that causes people to become angrier and more defensive than to feel that you are not being fair, and there's nothing that causes people to be more cooperative than to feel that you are bending over backwards to be fair to them and to their interests. So the fourth part of this is tit for tat. Every single time that you give in on one of their issues, you are putting money in the bank in terms of coming to a satisfactory conclusion on your major issues later on. So if you like, be a go-giver in the first part of the negotiation. Find every single way that you possibly can to cooperate and to work cooperatively with the other person, and you will build up a bigger and bigger propensity for them to want to do something for you later on. And later on you can say, look, we've given away all of these points. We've done all the giving up to now. All we're asking is that you concede to us a little bit in these areas, which of course are the critical areas. I remember once I negotiated a development agreement with a town. The critical element of the development agreement was off-site levies, which ran into about $400,000 or $500,000. We, the developers, did not want to have to put them up in front. They, the town, wanted the off-site levies to offset the cost of servicing the development. The critical point that I had in my mind is that we would agree and negotiate on what they should be, but what I wanted, once we'd agreed, is that we would not have to pay them until the lots were actually sold, and we could pay them out of the sales price of the lots. And we spent the entire day giving up everything except we agreed on their price, which was the amount they charged, but they agreed on our terms that it would be paid after we'd sold the lots rather than before, and it was the most critical single element of the agreement. Remember, price and terms are very different. You can agree to a price that may be more than you want to pay as long as you can get terms that are favorable. So if you concede on the price, they should concede on the terms, and vice versa. Be very alert to that. Gerald Nierenberg has a beautiful example. He says, this pen for $1,000. You as the negotiator say, yes, I'll pay you $1,000 for that pen. The terms of payment will be this. Every time I meet you in the Milwaukee airport at 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, I will give you $1 until the entire $1,000 is paid off. You see, if you can name the terms, then the price can be anything that you like. I had some friends who were negotiating some years ago. People wanted $1 million for the land. It wasn't worth more than $600,000 or $700,000. But they wanted $1 million. Why? It's because somebody that they knew had got $1 million for their land. And they finally agreed to pay them $1 million, but they agreed to pay it over 20 years with no interest. So it worked out to be less than $1 million, but they got the price. They named the terms. Okay, persuasion by social proof. This is another powerful way to get people to accept your arguments about what is fair and what is reasonable in the agreement. A is to use facts, statistics, names, numbers, proof, evidence from people that the people know about or have heard about who have already entered into this agreement. Using facts that confirm that this is a reasonable agreement and these are reasonable terms, and referring to people who have already done it is a tremendous tactic and extremely helpful in making sales. And also similar others in similar situations. If you can refer to people who are very much like the person you're negotiating with, who have entered into similar agreements under similar situations, under similar stresses, it's very likely that this will be a very, very powerful persuader. We are inordinately persuaded to do things that we think other people have done whose opinions we respect. If you're a doctor and you say that several doctors have already bought this computer at this price and these terms, the tendency for the doctor to enter into the agreement is far greater than if you say that you're the first doctor. Now, number 18 is price negotiating tactics. Okay, price tactics. Just 7 simple price tactics that you should use whenever you're buying anything that has an arbitrary price, from a package of chewing gum on up. The first is what is called the flinch. No matter what the price is, flinch and say, geez, that's expensive. Boy, that's a lot. Sometimes just flinching will cause the person to come down in price. B is just the question. You say, is that the best you can do? Is that the very best you can do? Very often just asking that and remaining perfectly silent will cause the person to say, well, we could probably get it down and so on. And we could probably chop something off of that. Well, what is the best you could do? And you keep asking, what is the best that you could do? What is the best that you could do? And surprisingly enough, they don't know if you've ever spoken to anybody else who's gotten a good deal from them, and they become very uneasy. And sometimes a question that I ask is, are you telling me you've never sold it for less than that to anybody else? Then nobody's ever bought it cheaper than that? Here's what you can say. I can get it cheaper elsewhere. I can get it cheaper. This demolishes a lot of price resistance. I can get it cheaper somewhere else. I can go somewhere else to get it. Very often they say, wait a second. Let's talk about this seriously. D is lowball. When they're asking you for $100, say, I'll give you $50. Sometimes they say, well, how about $60? Very often you find if you lowball and offer a price that is ridiculous, sometimes they will sell it to you for far less than you'd ever thought you were going to have to pay. E is to add what is called the nibble. And the nibble is the add-on. You say, okay, I'll agree to this price once you've wrapped it up and written it up, of course, but you'll throw in free delivery, won't you? And they say, well, if you don't throw in free delivery, I don't want the deal. Once you put the deal together, you see, you can nibble or add on or put a few little things on top of it. They'll say, well, rather than lose the deal, they'll throw it into it. Very, very straight tactics. Number 19 is one of my favorites. It's called the walk-away method. Now, the walk-away method is what I use most of the time. It's what I prefer that people use with me. It's simply this. You say to the person, you say, look, I don't want to quibble with you. You tell me what your very best price is, and I'll tell you whether or not I can meet it. If I can't meet it, I'll tell you, and that will be the end of it, and then you'll walk away. Or I often say to a person when I'm trying to buy something, I say, you tell me what your walk-away price is. In other words, you tell me the price below which you will not sell it. You tell me your final price, and if I can match it, we can discuss it. If I can't match it, then I'll walk away and we'll forget it. Very often, this gets you right straight down to the price that you end up buying it at. I prefer not to quibble. I prefer the walk-away price, and I bought houses like this, I bought cars like this, and I enter into almost all of my agreements by saying this is the least amount that I'll accept for it, or this is the most that I will pay for it. And it's amazing how that clears people's minds, and you get a yes or a no very fast. But, of course, you can always go back, and you can always go back and say, well, I can pay a little bit more, or I can charge a little bit less. Okay, number 20, what they call the Harvard Negotiating Project came up with 4 key elements to successful negotiating. I think this is a very important project. I think you should read the book called Getting to Yes, How to Negotiate. It has 4 things. It says, first of all, 4 elements are people. Separate the people from the problem. Separate the people so that the negotiation does not focus on personalities, but focuses clearly on the issues and on the negotiations. The second part is identify interests before you take positions. Identify interests. In other words, what are the needs of the different parties? Before you write down a list of what you want, write down a list of what you're trying to accomplish. What is the outcome intended to accomplish? The next is options. Develop options before you begin negotiating. What are all the different ways? And you can use brainstorming, you can use mindstorming, you can use a whiteboard, you can use a flip chart. But what are all the different ways that you could satisfy the interests and needs? And D is what they call criteria or boundary conditions. How are we going to decide whether or not we've come up with a good deal? And then what you do is you test the options that you've developed against the boundary conditions. Now, a good deal will satisfy this. It will give us that. It will achieve this. This will be what a good deal looks like for you. This will be what a good deal looks like for us. And then you go through and you discuss. And you discuss various ways that you can achieve the interests and the needs, that you can fulfill the objective criteria that you've established. Very powerful way of negotiating that keeps people's minds focused solely on the negotiation and keeps it off of the personalities and off of tangential issues. And finally, number 21. Remember that no negotiation is ever final. That no negotiation ends the transaction. That if you get new information that changes your perspective on the situation, go back and ask to reopen the negotiation. I can give you many examples of this. I have some very good friends who ran into financial difficulties on a building. They had to go back to the bank and renegotiate the entire financial package. Now, when you go back to renegotiate, you have to have something to offer. Nobody is going to renegotiate an agreement unless they somehow have a benefit or an advantage. So think through, what is the benefit or advantage for the other person to reopen negotiations and change the terms and conditions? And write down a list of all the benefits and sell your renegotiation on the basis of the benefits. In this case, their benefit was this. If we renegotiate this package, your position will be protected and you'll get your money. If we don't, we'll let the building go bankrupt and you'll lose all of your investment in it. Now, that made a lot of sense to the bank, and they were willing to be very, very flexible to stop from losing their investment and losing their heads. And let me summarize. 4 keys to negotiating. These are the big 4. Never forget them. If you remember these 4 keys, you will become and will remain an excellent negotiator. Number 1 is get the facts. Prepare in advance. The power is on the side of the person with the most facts, the most knowledge, the most information, the most options, the most alternatives, the most knowledge about the other person, and so on. Prepare in advance, get the facts. Number 2 is ask for what you want. Ask your way to success. Ask for what you want. Say, as we get into this, I want you to know that this is what we would really like to come out of it with. And don't be afraid to ask for a lot going into a negotiation on price, because price is very arbitrary. The third is to seek win-win solutions. Don't seek to win. Don't seek to manipulate. Don't seek to find yourself with an agreement that is to the detriment of the other person. Because remember, life is very long, and what goes around comes around. And if you enter into a bad agreement today, it's going to come back to haunt you later. And the final key to successful negotiations is this: practice, practice, practice. Negotiate on every occasion. Negotiate on every opportunity. Negotiate even if it's buying clothes, buying cars, buying furniture, buying refrigerators. Practice, practice, practice. It can save you a lot of money. It can save you a lot of time. It can make you a much more effective person, and it can contribute mightily to the success of your career and business.